What if your Azure resources were never exposed to the public internet? That's the goal of modern cloud architecture, secure, private access by design. And for the Azure Network Engineer Associate exam, this is a core concept you need to master. In this video, you'll learn how to secure Azure services using Private Endpoints, Service Endpoints, and Private DNS. We'll do this through scenario-based practice questions, so you understand not just the concepts, but when to use each solution. So far, we've covered networking and connectivity. Now, it's time to secure those services. Let's start with our first scenario. Question 1. A company wants to ensure that its Azure storage account is accessible only through a private IP within a virtual network and not exposed to the public internet. Which solution should be implemented? A. Private Endpoint. B. Service Endpoint. C. Azure Firewall. D. Network Security Group. Pause and think about the best option. Correct answer, A. Private Endpoint. Explanation: Private Endpoint assigns a private IP address inside your VNet, keeps all traffic within the Azure backbone, and removes any public exposure. In contrast, Service Endpoints still rely on public endpoints, but they secure and restrict access to them. Question 2. You need to secure access from a subnet to an Azure SQL database while keeping the service publicly accessible for other clients. Which solution should you use? A. Private Endpoint. B. ExpressRoute. C. Service Endpoint. D. Azure Bastion. Pause and think about the best option. The correct answer is C. Service Endpoint. Explanation: Service endpoints extend the VNet identity to Azure Services, allow access restriction based on the subnet, and still operate through public endpoints. A private endpoint would remove public access entirely, which does not meet the requirement. If you're practicing AZ-700 practice questions consistently, platforms like PrepBolt practice questions help you quickly identify these subtle differences between similar services. Question 3. You deploy a private endpoint for an Azure storage account. Virtual machines in the VNet must resolve the storage account name to its private IP address. What should you configure? A. Public DNS Zone. B. Azure DNS Private Zone. C. Network Security Group. D. Route Table. Pause and think about the best option. Correct answer, B. Azure DNS Private Zone. Explanation: Private DNS zones map the service FUDN to a private IP, enable seamless name resolution, and integrate with VNets. Without proper DNS configuration, private endpoint connectivity will fail. Question 4. A private endpoint is deployed in one virtual network. You need to allow access from another VNet. What should you configure? A. VNet peering. B. NSG rules. C. Route table. D. Azure Firewall. Pause and think about the best option. Correct answer, A. VNet peering. Explanation: To enable access, peer the VNets and ensure DNS resolution works correctly across them. NSGs do not provide Cross-VNet connectivity, and DNS is essential for private endpoint scenarios. Question 5. You need to ensure that an Azure Key Vault is accessible only from specific VNets. Has no public internet exposure. Which combination should you use? A. Service Endpoint only. B. Azure Firewall only. C. NSG plus Public Endpoint. D. Private Endpoint plus Disable Public Access. Pause and think about the best option. Correct answer, D. Private Endpoint plus Disable Public Access. Explanation: Best practice is to use a private endpoint for private access and disable public network access entirely, since service endpoints still rely on public endpoints. Question 6. An organization must prevent data exfiltration from Azure storage accounts. Access must be limited strictly to approved VNets using private connectivity. What should be implemented? A. Service Endpoint. B. Private Endpoint. C. NSG rules. D. Route server. Pause and think about the best option. Correct answer, B. Private Endpoint. Explanation: Because a private endpoint ensures traffic stays private, while a firewall restricts access to only approved networks and helps prevent unauthorized outbound data flow. Question 7. An on-premises network connected via VPN must access an Azure service using a private endpoint. What additional configuration is required? A. Private DNS zone. B. Public DNS resolution. C. NSG rules. D. Traffic manager. Pause and think about the best option. Correct answer: A. Private DNS zone. Explanation: to enable hybrid access, configure a private DNS zone and implement DNS forwarding from on-premises, since private endpoint access will fail without proper DNS resolution. In this session, we explored AZ-700 practice questions on private access, a key part of designing secure Azure services. If this helped you master private access, hit like and subscribe for the next deep dive. For structured practice, I recommend PrepBolt's scenario-based AZ-700 questions. They simulate real exam scenarios and sharpen your decision-making. Next time, we'll cover monitoring, troubleshooting, and optimizing Azure networking, another critical AZ-700 domain. Stay consistent, keep practicing, and keep building toward your Azure Network Engineer Associate certification. See you in the next session.